There's a reason that I told you those 3 steps so often, and that's because they are the exact same 3 steps that go to each row of our next section, which is Fair Isle, which is among people's all-time wonderful favorite ways to deal with yarn. You can see that the colors go all the way across the row, and behind these colors, they are stranded. I want you to look at the back side of this piece of knitting. Typically, in hand knitting, these strands tend to pucker. What I find with bond knitting is that it has been my only successful way for me to get perfect tension across the back, especially with worsted weight yarns. I haven't done too much with lighter weight yarns in this technique. All these rows have exactly the same 3 steps as the rows that you've just done. And there are a couple of other little rules I want to tell you about before we try it. These are not ironclad rules, of course, because there's always an exception. But in general, when you're working Fair Isle technique, it's best to use only 2 colors per row. And it's also best not to strand over more than 5 stitches at a time. Usually even less than that. It depends on your fiber, it depends on what it is you're making. But in this case, this is wool, and if it were worn, well, obviously no one's going to stick their fingers through the back of a sampler, so I don't have to worry about the strands. But if you're making a kid's sweater and you want to do some of that stranding in the sleeves, you don't want those strands to be too long because they stick their little fingers. Actually, adults stick their little fingers in there. So let's put the sampler away and get to the business of knitting. Now, unlike the stripes that you just did, it's important that your strand go all the way from the beginning to the very end of the row. And for today, we're going to choose an arbitrary little pattern. It'll be a little bit of a chevron. I'm going to come in 3 needles, and then the next 2 needles I'm going to push out into holding position. This is first step. Contrast color needles to holding position. For me, it's actually easier for me to look at these needle butts than to try to count the heads. And I have, on occasion, cut green cards, cut them out with an X-Acto knife. I don't have one here right now, where I've cut out these little sections and I can put them on and they'll push whole sections forward at once. I once did a series of designs that had chevrons that were 3 stitches forward and 4 stitches back, and so I would move those green cards along. So you can make any kind of template to help you. Okay, step number 1. Contrast color needles to holding position. Now what if the phone rings? And I don't know whether or not I've done step number 2, which is to knit across with the main color. Well, I'll show you. Look, if you can see right now, there is simply a stitch on each of these needles. After you knit across, and it should be slowly. The more stitches you want to lift over, the more the bond finds it difficult to get that yarn back down into the next needle to knit. After I've knit my main color row, see these nice floats along here? Those are my signals that I've completed step 2. Then I work with my main color yarn behind the bond and my contrast color yarn in front of the bond. Also, I like to work in the same direction. Because the bond is bidirectional, it doesn't matter if you knit from one side to the other, depending on your colors. But personally, I find it less confusing if I knit in the same direction with my contrast color as I have with my main color. When I pull up this strand, this is the Goldilocks principle. You don't want that strand to be too tight. You don't want it to be too loose. You want it to be just right. This strand here. Now, how much pressure do I use? Well, I just pull it so it's barely taut, and it always seems to work out. That comes with experience. Just as in hand knitting. Knit all the way across. And when I get to this end, I notice I have 3 more stitches with my main color, but my color design is done here. Too often, I think, patterns do not tell you that when you're working with a Fair Isle, you need to take that contrast color yarn all the way to the end stitch, hang it over, just like you caught that float, remember, when you were doing your stripes? What this does is give you some pressure and tension out to the edge of your knitting from this last stitch, and it closes up a hole. If we were to start right back knitting and have this in the contrast color again, we'd have 2 rows there that just weren't connected. The strands are what hold them together. The same is true of this end. I'll go back to my bitter end, and being a moderately lazy knitter, I don't want to work this in anyway later. I may have to work part of it into the seam because I only have 3 stitches there, but I'm going to put that over and under, hang a clip over here. That does not absolve me from the steps I have to take again. I'm going to go back and do another row of Fair Isle, which means I'm going to follow the 3 steps. And I'm going to stagger these chevrons so they go up in this direction. I'm going to put out 2 needles, skip 3. And once my pattern's established, I can just look at these needle butts. Sometimes you have to hold your fingers on the fabric. Also, a little trick. Because I had 3 out, I have to go back. My chevron is going to start cutting into this end. Step number 1, to holding position. If at any time you jam while you're doing Fair Isle, and it sometimes happens, it's because one of these needles has drifted back just a teeny tiny bit and that needle butt's getting in the way of the key plate. So just look along these needles, pull out any of these offending needles. Again, remember I told you never do it with your fingers a long time ago in the Meet Your Bond tape, but I just did it. Be careful if you do it with your fingers. Now I'm on to step 3, which is to manually knit back across. Remember keeping that float just right. Need a little bit of slack here. This time we're not going, this is cleverly designed. We don't have to take this yarn all the way to the end of the row. It takes itself to the end of the row. Okay, I would like you to stop the tape and do 5 or 6 rows either of this chevron design or of any design of your making. Just remember that each row has the 3 steps. Work several rows plain and then turn the tape back on.